My name is Alaina Enslen, and I'm a mixed media artist. I've been painting for over about 20 years now and working with encaustics for about 8 years. Behind me is my studio. This is actually my attic, and I painted it during quarantine in 2020, all white, because I felt like I was in this coffin when it was all dark and wood. So, welcome to my studio art attic. I have a BFA from the University of Montevallo. I chose University of Montevallo because I liked a small liberal arts college, but I also played soccer in college, so it was kind of fun to be able to do both. I had really great teachers, and I fell in love with ceramics and painting. I actually started off with my concentration being in graphic design because I wanted to be an illustrator. I love telling stories, and I thought that's what I wanted to do, but I quickly realized that the whole analytical kind of cut paste design was just too constricting for my creativity and love of material. So I quickly switched to painting as my concentration. And I'm surprised I didn't have a dual major with ceramics because I still really want to get my hands back in the dirt because that's a lot of fun. I was a very curious child and it got me into a lot of mischief and trouble. I was always one of those that just painted on the wall. If I could get my hands on any kind of mark making device, it was going to be all over the floor, all over me. And I loved scissors, and so I would be cutting a lot of different fabrics, a lot of my little baby brother's clothes. I would start cutting and making clothes for my dolls, for my pets, pretty much, anything. I actually had an experience where I stuck a bobby pin into an electrical outlet and I got really bad third degree burns, but afterwards I had an issue with speaking. I stopped speaking. And I think that really was the push of art being that first language and just a language that just continued to feel what I was most comfortable with afterwards. So I just loved painting, I loved drawing, I loved creating, and it just felt like myself when I was doing this. And so today it's just a big part of who I am, and just continue to create and explore and be curious with materials. My mother was very creative as a homemaker, and she got that from my grandmother. I have many grandmothers and great aunts who were quilt makers and could sew and make pretty much anything with thread and needle. I could not do that. That was an art form that I couldn't get into. So mine was let me take all the fabric and the collages and the paper and make a two-dimensional painting with them. That's what how I express myself. But I really felt like they had a great eye for just functional art in the sense of making my pajamas and dresses and quilts for the family. From high school, when I decided that I wanted to become an artist, I think some of the biggest influencers were Chuck Close and other artists that were just using tons of materials like Robert Rauschenberg, and then female artists that were very narrative because I started off making a lot of narrative portraits with different materials, and so I love Frida Kahlo. And then now, there's just so many incredible artists, but encaustic artists. One of my mentors is Lauren Glessner. I love her work. Lori Moriarty, Michael David. There's just so many incredible encaustic artists that, I enjoy seeing their work, and other collage artists that I just love looking at because I love, I still work with papers like Deborah Roberts and Mark Bradford and Elliot Hunley. Yeah, those are just, there's just so many incredible artists out there, and it's wonderful to be kind of a part of this renaissance, I think, of encaustic work too. In 2016, bird watching was probably my first big series of work I did from what I call a long 10, 14-year maternity leave. I have 4 children, and it was really hard to create a big body of work with the kids till they got old enough where they could go to school. We moved to Portugal for a sabbatical that my husband was on, and we did a series of visual studies for his book that he was working on. And so all these collages that you see are from this visual study of a book that's basically based on a poem that we kind of argue as the most popular poem in the world. It's called Song of Exile by Gonzalez Diaz, who's Brazilian. And so all these collages kind of go through all these different paradigms and use of this poem throughout over 170 years. And today you can see a lot of Instagram and Twitter using part of this poem. In 2018, when I got back from Portugal, I wanted to work with a medium that was inspiring and that got me excited. I was done working with acrylic. I didn't really want to do collages, paper collages. So I started getting into encaustic. And so basically, encaustic comes from encausticos, which is a Greek word meaning to heat or to burn. And what you do is you mix beeswax with damar resin, and then it melts down to this consistency, and then you pour it into a pan and you let it get solid. And then once it's solid, you can get all the little inconsistencies you kind of see floating around. They actually all come down to the bottom and you can just kind of scrape them out. And then with that encaustic, I would paint over these photographs. So this is like my first kind of approach to encaustic medium. I was just kind of getting my hands wet in it, and I wanted to explore it with collage just to see what kind of textures I could achieve with the encaustic and with different pigments and with the papers. This, if you look at the little brown, that's actually shellac that kind of gives this nice little cellular spreading effect. And that was really fun to kind of explore in the work. And after I did a few of these collages, this is New York, Niagara Falls, and I did a lot of the Hudson Valley, kind of like, they were like my little homage to like the river school artist. I just fell in love with the landscapes when I moved here to New York, and this had been on my mind to do a series of work that just kind of showed my love for the Hudson Valley. And, after I did this series, I was like, okay, what's next? I have a studio now. I can work big. I can work with different materials. What can I, do with encaustic? And I actually had a lot of fabric. I collected a lot of fabrics, and I was like, let's see what encaustic does with fabric. And so in 2019, I started pulling out a lot of the fabrics and adding wax onto it. And I just loved how the wax would just kind of embed itself and saturate the fabric, and how it would turn colors and just give this wonderful texture. And you could smooth it out. You could give it a brush technique, like a brushed texture. And you could even bead the wax on top, like with multiple layers. So this texture and this kind of merge of the fabric and wax just really spoke to me. So that's what I've been doing, since 2019 is, just continuing playing with these collages of the fabric and wax. This piece, what I felt was like the kind of breakthrough where I was really getting the form and the collage with the wax. And I felt like, okay, I'm hitting something. Something's happening here. So this piece was really meaningful to me in this series. This one was done before that other piece, and you can see that it's much more structured with rectangle shapes and more geometric. You could tell I started working with like a rotary cutter, so I could get these really nice angles in these more organic shapes. And I really felt like that helped move the collage pieces around and create these beautiful spaces in between. So that just started really kind of being the focus of a lot of these compositions. So in 2020, when I had 4 kids at home during quarantine, I needed to find a way to create some artwork that was fast and that was kind of freeing and that I could just do really quickly. And so I got into encaustic monotypes, and the color, the movement is just so lush and translucent. So here you see a lot of the monotypes, and this is collaged onto a large birchwood substrate. And as you can see, you just get this lush fluidity of the wax, and it's like merging with the colors, and it has a wonderful sense of just different land masses and movement. So these all have started from 2020 of collaging with the fabric and the monotypes. The monotype is just basically like a singular print, and I'm using a griddle, and I'll just apply and melt a bunch of wax. And then I take a piece of rice paper that's really transparent and thin, and I'll just pull the paper across the griddle. And it's almost like a marbling effect, if you've ever worked with marbling on water with paints and stuff. And it's somewhat similar. So you're, pulling the paper across the wax, and then you just You get all these different lines and these different colors blending in together. So this is what I love about wax, is because it just has this willingness to transform from solid to liquid, back to solid, and heating and cooling. I like to work a lot with mulberry papers, very thin, nice Japanese washi papers. And then I just drag it across. There's all these different kind of ways that you can move the paper across the griddle to get different forms. So that's been kind of fun to explore. What I love about encaustic painting is how it just draws you in. You know, I love the smell of the wax. I love the textures where it can look like buttercream and you just want to go and touch the wax. I love the translucency with the monotype. So if anything I'm trying to convey is like emotional response to the materials of the fabric and the wax, and how wax can just be seen so diversely.
Thank you for joining us for the Orange County Arts Council virtual studio visit. This program is made possible by donations from people like you. 50% of donations go directly to the artists featured, and 50% to the Orange County Arts Council programs. Please consider donating today. You can donate by going to ocartscouncil.org. The Arts Council's virtual studio visits are presented in partnership with the Newburgh Free Library and are made possible in part by NISCA,